feel like we should have found something that was more Lord of the Ringsy for this show.
I say that every time, and we never do anything about it.
You wanted something energetic for the show, and now we're stuck with that music forever.
I don't know. That might be just like traditional. Like that's what the music that the dwarves play in the mountain actually sounds like.
Yeah.
I could hear that. Just it's rock. It makes sense.
They're playing rock music.
Yeah. We're off to a great start. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our final episode of Explain It to Me for The Rings of Power Season 1, Episode 8.
This was a short-lived after show.
Yeah, well, we just didn't have time. We couldn't make it work. So hopefully in Season 2, all of our schedules work out a lot better, and there won't be 8 other shows happening at the same time. But I think they said they were about to start filming Season 2, so hopefully it won't be too long of a wait.
Yeah, hopefully.
I would assume they would try to get it out like yearly. I know like Andor, its second season is about to start filming in November, but it probably won't come out until like 2024 at the earliest. So
yeah, and it's anybody's guess with Lord of the Rings because they're spending so much on every episode. Is there that much more work to do, or is the amount of money they're spending mean that it's going to get done quick? Who knows?
Yeah, and I'm sure they have a lot of post-production to get through. So, but let's talk about this actual episode and not what's coming in a year or two, because a lot happened. I think we should probably start with the biggest reveal, the thing I was most excited to see. And Ashton, I don't know if you're even going to know what this is because it's a pretty deep cut, but that spear is really important. I don't know if you know that. It's called Eglos.
It's Eglos. It's Gil-galad's spear, Eglos, which means icicle in Elven, basically.
I genuinely got excited when I saw him holding it. For people who don't know,
when you saw it, you were like, "Oh my god, Ashton's gonna freak out."
Yes,
I'm pretty sure Eglos is Ashton's Glupshido. To put it into Star Wars terms, I think your favorite little minor thing in Lord of the Rings might be Gil-galad's spear.
Yeah, that's like the thing that I've used in the past to like of just some dumb little like very very specific niche trivia that I know have like been able to pull out about Lord of the Rings to make people just go, okay.
I genuinely got excited for you. Were you excited to see Eglos?
Yeah, so it's actually in the show. So hopefully we'll get to see him use it at some point too.
Well, it's briefly in the prologue for Lord of the Rings as well, so I assume they would try to keep that consistent. We'll see him probably kill some orcs at some point with it.
That probably, yeah.
What is it? Why is it cool and special?
It's just a spear that Gil-galad uses, and it has a cool name.
Look at it, Molly. Look how cool it is.
It does look very cool.
He takes it to the battle of the Last Alliance and all of that, and he uses it to fight against Sauron, and it's just a cool weapon. It's basically like an elven version of Narsil, sort of, as far as famous weapons go.
What happened to it? Is it still around?
I don't think it was actually recovered after the Last Alliance, but
that sucks.
I could be wrong. I don't know. I don't know that there is any information about what happens to it.
Okay, well,
they originally in the movies they originally had a storyboard for more detail around the fight between Gil-galad and Sauron and Elendil, and in that one, Sauron like picks up Gil-galad by his face basically, and then makes him burst into flame.
I remember
he really hated Gil-galad.
Wow, that's like a Mortal Kombat final move.
Yeah, it is something I've always loved about the Lord of the Rings films is that they put so much detail. I think they just filmed so much and didn't know what was going to make it or not. But the fact that Gil-galad is in it, and now that we get to kind of see his story more as someone who didn't know it nearly as well, I'm really enjoying that aspect of the series. But we all agree that Eglos was the coolest thing in the episode, but everyone else here probably wants us to talk about Sauron. So that we did finally get the reveal. But I thought they did a good job with it because even down to the moment, I was like, oh, maybe the stranger is Sauron. They kind of tricked me with whoever the acolyte people were. So
yeah,
did it work for you?
Yeah, I mean, when I was watching the episode when it first started, and they had the like the acolyte cultist people find the stranger and be like, we've been searching for you, Lord Sauron. I was like, I was right, because I was still thinking that that's who it was, and then about halfway through I was like, I was wrong. So
I thought they did a good job with that bait and switch, because I was, hoping that was a wizard, but I was not convinced the whole time. They did enough, I thought, to make him still seem perilous and a little scary.
How embarrassing for those cultists to make that mistake.
Yeah, that was a little. I'm unsure about what the cultists were. They're just like acolytes of Morgoth, or
they're from Rune, which is like a kingdom to the far east. It's where I think it's where a lot of the Easterlings come from later in the like Lord of the Rings.
Are they just super into Morgoth, or?
Yeah, they had a lot of like sorcery cults and things.
Cool. But they
they're gone now, right? They're just like, they burst into flame and then they turned into ghosts and then they disappeared.
Yeah, I don't know what exactly the Istar did to them, precisely, but yeah, he basically, like, I guess turned them into spirits and then exploded them into moths.
Yeah.
That I couldn't tell if they were always like, were they supposed to be wraiths like that, or did he turn them into it? Like, I couldn't tell if he was revealing their full nature, their true nature.
I don't know, because like the way that the wraiths work, like the Nazgul, for example, is that like creatures in Middle Earth have like a spirit self that exists in the unseen world, and then they have like their physical self. And elves, for example, like Galadriel, who saw the trees, are special because they exist in both at the same time. Whereas like the Nazgul, what the rings that they got did to them is that slowly like siphoned their being into the unseen world, which is why they're invisible, other than like the robes and things that they're wearing. But when Frodo puts the ring on, he sees them in their like ghostly form, because he shifts into the unseen world when he puts the ring on. So yeah, that was weird. It was like we were seeing their like unseen form. Like maybe by being like sorcery people, they have more presence in the unseen world than most people would, which makes sense because that's where all the like magic stuff happens usually.
That's cool. That's interesting. So I'd never really thought about like where magic comes from in Tolkien's world.
So like the way that I was thinking of it was almost like he like exposed their like souls or something, and then rather than destroying them, he like divided them up into a bunch of harmless little pieces that look like moths. I don't know. Maybe that's like nicer than just obliterating them.
And maybe thousands of years from now, one of those moths will come to Gandalf's aid at the top of Orthanc.
Yeah, and redeem itself.
Yeah, I'm good now.
Sorry about that whole Sauron business. I'll go get the eagles.
So I guess the cultists just showed up, saw the same evidence that we saw of like, oh, he landed in a crater and it kind of looked like an eye and the fire isn't hot. Must be Sauron.
Yeah.
So, but I guess they know that Sauron is out there and they were just trying to find him. The whole cultist thing, I can't tell if I bought it in the end, if it was just something to be a red herring for us and help us like look over here and not at Halbrand. But I like.
Well, I mean, it ties it into whatever they're going to do next, with the stranger, because they're heading to Rune now.
That's true. Yeah.
So it sort of ties it into that whole storyline. So then we'll get to see more stuff about like these sorcerers and that sort of thing. Also, this was the second time that we heard about Rune, because earlier in the season, Miriel, as a joke, said that Elendil was a runic emperor or something, I think.
Huh.
I want to say that was what she said, unless I'm misremembering the earlier line. I didn't look it up, so that's just off the top of my head.
Well, I like all of the Rune stuff and the fact that... So now let's just stay on the stranger, I guess. Do you think that is Gandalf, or is it one of the blue wizards? Because I do like that kind of he had a mission, and it was to find those stars in the east.
Mhm.
And I that's like all I know about the Blue Wizards is that their mission was to the east. If I'm
Yeah.
right about that.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems more like a Blue Wizard thing, but then he said the whole thing about follow your nose, which made me immediately think like, okay, I guess it's got to be Gandalf now. Like he's literally saying the same things. Um, but who knows? I mean, maybe that's like in the Wizards 101 book that they get before they leave Undying Lands. I don't know.
There were so many like little connections to Gandalf in this, like turning them into moths. I was like, oh yeah, Gandalf had that moth friend.
hmm
And yeah, that line, and just the fact that he likes the Harfoots and like makes this
Yeah.
strong bond with Nori, like maybe that continues with
Yeah. Well, and Gandalf was famously like the only one of the wizards that ever really noticed the hobbits. He actually paid attention to what they were doing and didn't immediately disregard them.
Mhm.
So it would make sense if that's partly because he has this sort of history with them.
I thought that I assume that has to be Gandalf because of that direct line. It's like, yeah, that it could be part of the Wizard's manual, but I don't think they were going to include that line.
They just come out
Without-
with like the pull string lines
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
where it's like they all have their set of lines that they
Like-
always say.
Always follow your nose. You shall not pass.
Yeah.
So does that? I think you said before that Gandalf supposedly or is supposed to not arrive in Middle Earth until like the Third Age. So how is that working out for you?
I mean, it's a slight change. It doesn't really matter that much because like we don't really know of anything that Gandalf does in particular that's important until much later. And so it's completely open for him to potentially have a, more involved backstory. Yeah, the one thing I was going to mention is the one thing that we do know that he does earlier is that when he first arrives in Middle-earth, he gets Narya from Círdan.
Oh, he gets
But-
that right away.
As soon as he arrives in Middle-earth, because Círdan was carrying it after the Last Alliance. Because Gil-galad had two of them, and Galadriel had one of them. And before the battle at the Last Alliance, Gil-galad had the foresight to give those two rings that he was carrying to someone else, because there was a good chance that he would get destroyed by Sauron. So he gives one to Elrond and one to Círdan. And then when Gandalf arrives, Círdan, who's like extremely wise because he's possibly one of the oldest people in Middle-earth, just kind of has the foresight to know that Gandalf could make better use of the ring than he could, and so he gives it to him.
I like the idea that Gandalf arrived like the stranger, though, and had no idea who he was, and was just kind of like bumbling around. And you're like, "Here you go, ring of power, off you. Like, have fun."
Yeah, he
Is that
gets there,
so-
doesn't know who he is, and then some elf with a beard gives him a ring.
Is Narya the name of his ring? Or is that the red
Yeah.
one?
That's the red one, yeah, the
Okay.
ruby ring, the ring of
And-
fire,
Ninya is Galadriel's, and
Vilya.
Vilya is that winds up with Elrond in the end.
Yeah.
We're getting a little off track of where I wanted, but now I have this question. So Gil-galad was given 2 rings from the start.
In the books, he was carrying 2 of them, but like Celebrimbor gave 2 of them to High King Gil-galad, and then gave 1 to Galadriel.
Okay, just like because Galadriel made the big deal, which I liked, of we have to make 3 because 1 will corrupt, 2 will divide. With 3, there's balance. But
I like that. In the books, there wasn't really a reason why they made 3 for the elves. It just was what they did.
Yeah,
She just
but,
wanted
but it's
one.
like, but then if you give 2 of them to one person, it's like that defeats the purpose. But I imagine they will not do that.
Yeah, well, plus they had all 3 of them just like standing there while they were making the ring. So I have a feeling they're going to divide them out between Gil-galad, Elrond, and Galadriel.
Yeah, and I wonder if even Galadriel will take one from the start. I don't know. Like,
I don't know.
It's Gil-galad's probably still pissed off at her. So
I mean, they may also not give one to Elrond because he's not even an elf lord,
right.
Yeah.
Unless they decide to raise his station a little bit and give him a ring too.
Well, before we get too far off of the stranger, or the wizard, as I guess we can call him, probably Gandalf. I really like, the idea that he spent all that time with the Harfoots, and that's why he has such a connection to the halflings. I also loved the scene when he just says like, "I'm good," and I
Yeah,
like
I
I
was
thought
gonna
he was
bring
going to
that up
say his
too.
name,
Yeah.
but just like him deciding that he's going to be good. And
Well, it was a cool callback to what Nori said earlier,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
So yeah.
That was
And
such a cool moment.
I like that he finally was like, get away from me because I'm going to hurt you with my magic. Like, just give me some space. That's all he's
Mhm.
ever needed. I'm
Yeah.
about to do something scary. Move 10 feet that way. I was sad about Sadok. That he
Yeah.
died. And would
You got
Gandalf
to have
have
some
had
cool moments though. Like when
Yeah.
he jumped out of the bushes and stabbed that one cultist. That was so
Mhm.
cool.
In the foot, yeah.
Would Gandalf have had
was like-
any healing powers, or did he use all of his strength to turn everyone into moths?
I mean, there's not a lot of examples that I can think of off the top of my head of Gandalf like healing anyone from like a mortal wound or anything like that. I don't. I mean, there's like elvish medicine, right? And
Right.
like Elrond is an accomplished healer. In like Lord of the Rings, they take Frodo to Elrond, but that's kind of different. That's not really like the same kind of magic that like the wizards do.
Okay.
I don't know that they ever really like heal people from injuries like that.
Okay.
But I mean, he heals his arm with ice or whatever earlier,
yeah.
but that wasn't like the same thing as getting stabbed with a
Right.
throwing moon or whatever.
You sure?
I loved just nothing does a better job at like taking someone down a notch than just getting hit in the head with a bunch of small rocks.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
She was like all powerful with her staff and everything, and it was just like dunk, dunk, and like I loved that.
Yeah,
It's the Hobbit thing to do. It's
Yeah.
freaking
Anybody
happening.
that's played Battle for Middle Earth knows that the hobbits can throw rocks like nobody else.
It's like Elf with the snowballs. They're like really
Yeah.
accurate.
Basically, yeah. That's all they got. They know one thing, and it's how to pick up rocks and throw them.
Except for Sadok, who was hilariously terrifying when he jumped out of the bush and stabbed that person in the foot.
That was
love
his one moment to shine.
them using like their camouflage and having their little
Mhm.
bird whistles. That was all cool stuff.
Well, the thing that I liked about that was that it immediately made me think of like at the very beginning of the show when we saw those humans that were like scared of the Harfoots and they were like, oh yeah, they're like little monsters that'll like appear out of nowhere.
That's
It's like
true.
he like appears out of nowhere and is just like, yeah. I was like, okay, yeah, that could actually be terrifying.
That
If
tracks,
someone
yeah.
somehow got on the wrong side of the Harfoots or was a danger to them.
Sadok is a serial killer, and we just didn't know it. Well, let's jump over since we got confirmation that the stranger is a wizard, and we went over to Halbrand, and we got I was a little annoyed that Alden and Rachel put those thoughts into my head when I was on Casterly Talk. That the second he walked into the forge with Celebrimbor and he was just like, "Have you tried this?" I think I just screamed, like yeah, you're here to help. Okay, fine.
Yeah. And also when he like walked into the forge seemingly unharmed after being like near death.
We rode for 6 days without resting.
Yeah.
And this dude got stabbed. I was like, oh man.
Well, and then when he said it,
so
we call
much
it a
better.
gift. I was like, yep, all right.
Fine.
I was like kind of frustrated because Celebrimbor is supposed to be like this masterful, like specialist at what he does, like knows all about alloys and stuff, and that he had never thought to do that, or like he was kind of like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I should try that. And I was like, really?
Well, I mean, partly it's because what he's trying to do is tampering with like the unseen world and like magic stuff, you know. And so while he probably was like, oh yeah, that alloy would work as a metal, he probably wasn't thinking about, oh, that would make the like magic properties of Mithril better.
So is this all kind of like new territory for him, working and with magic and stuff?
Yeah. So like the way that I kind of think of it is like Celebrimbor was an accomplished craftsman, but he didn't really know anything near how much Sauron knows about magic.
the Leonardo DiCaprio point meme. Celebrimbor just came off as like such a dummy in this episode to me,
He
because
did,
like
kind of, yeah.
he gets the idea and then he's like obsessed with it and he's like, I'm gonna do this, and I don't know. I was like, ugh.
Well, that's something I wanted to bring up to Ashton, because I saw on Reddit someone made a really good point of we've never seen this story play out in specifics, and it's kind of an impossible task almost when you read about the second age, and it just kind of says, and then Sauron shows up and deceives them, and that's all the detail we get. So now we have to find a way to try to make the deception believable.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that has to be hard, where Tolkien was just like, yeah, and then they're deceived, they're tricked, but how? So
Yeah.
do you think that worked out in a satisfying way?
Yeah, I think so. And it also actually like ties in with everything we've seen in the series so far, where we knew that Sauron was experimenting with the like old magic, and trying to um discover ways to do whatever it was he was trying to do, but he was like experimenting with the unseen world. And then it's like, okay, he actually figured some things out, and now he's coming back to Eregion and basically tricking the elves into actually using that knowledge that he uncovered. And it makes sense that Celebrimbor didn't know that, because it was like deep knowledge that Sauron didn't even really just know. He had to experiment and figure it out.
So is that kind of where has he been for however long? What was he just traveling around trying to?
I guess. I mean, all we know is that he went to the north with a bunch of orcs and then shows up as Halbrand in that weird flotilla of people.
Yeah, he was.
But
like,
I guess at some point he ended up in the Southlands and did something with Adar. We don't know where Adar is either. Like, we haven't seen him since since Aradrin blew up. I mean, presumably he was just in a house that got burned down or something, but who knows? I mean, he might still be around now too.
Oh, he was at the very end of episode 6.
Was he?
Or 7. Yeah.
Oh, right. Because then they have the whole thing with the Southlands turning into Mordor, and he was sitting there.
So he's alive, and
he's there.
I think we're gonna get more. I like looking back at that moment of Halbrand attacking Adar and being like, "Do you remember me?" Because I think it's probably true that Adar attacked Sauron and hurt him. So that might be like number 1 on Sauron's to-do list for season 2. It's like kill Adar.
Well, and I mean, maybe we might get a flashback kind of thing of what actually happened between them, because that may have actually just been his idea in the first place, like to trick Adar into thinking that he was dead for some reason, so we'll see.
It's interesting I wonder if we're going to figure out how he got onto that flotilla. Was that all a ploy? Did he know Galadriel was going off on the boat, and maybe he's like, I'll just try to find her? Or I wonder what that's all about.
Also, all those people on the flotilla that he just immediately sacrificed to the giant fish dragon.
He's like Grogu. He needed a nap.
Yeah.
And now I rest. So do you think he is being genuine when he says he wants to heal Middle Earth? And what is...
Well, I think his idea of healing Middle Earth and bringing peace to Middle Earth is to bring it all under his control.
Which I really, really liked. I guess now we're going to get into that scene where he reveals himself to Galadriel. I thought that scene was awesome.
Their conversation was so cool. And like, you said that there was a bunch of similar lines to what she says in the Peter Jackson films when she is like, I could have been a queen, And
I think they're from the book as well. But him telling her, you can be as treacherous as the sea, stronger than the foundations of the earth, in place of or you'd be my queen alongside me. Like, all of those lines. Again, it makes that scene in Fellowship so much better, in my opinion.
And I feel like she thought about it for a second. She was like, maybe. Maybe.
Well, that it reminded me so much of The Last Jedi, when Snoke is dead and they fight off the Praetorian guards, and then Kylo Ren says, Rey, join me, and we can heal the galaxy by ruling it. We can make it what we want it to be. That's exactly the same vibe that I got. And yeah, I loved that line where she said, like, do you want to heal Middle Earth or rule it? And he was like, I don't see a difference. I was like, that's good. I liked it.
Yeah.
I want to bring this up. Super chat from Tom Strand. Maybe Sauron came down like Gandalf and landed in water, and that's why the cultists thought the stranger was Sauron. Alex, you mentioned something about like when we first saw the meteors, like a bunch of different characters saw a meteor, and you were like, maybe there were different ones.
Well, that's because I think it shows 5 different people watching the meteor, and they're all over the place. They're all in different areas. So I think Gil-galad sees one. Obviously, the Harfoots see one. Bronwyn sees one. We see him 5 times. So basically, I'm not saying that one of them was Sauron, but I wonder if all 5 of the wizards were sent out, and then we just followed one of them.
That would be interesting if it wasn't actually just different people seeing it as it went across all the way across the sky, but if it was actually 5 different ones that landed in different places.
Like, I kind of think they were meant to just show, like, oh, everyone saw the same meteor, but it would be neat if... Did all the wizards come out at the same time in the books, or...
So there's basically 2 different versions of it, and in one version, all 5 of the wizards are sent out at the same time. And in the other version, the 2 blue wizards are sent ahead of the other wizards.
Okay.
And then they go into the east and do whatever their mission is, and we never hear from them again. And then the other 3 show up together: Radagast, Gandalf, and Saruman. And in those versions, they just arrive in a boat from the Undying Lands in the Grey Havens.
Okay.
But this would be different. But I mean, the only importance to the difference would be that we would need another avenue for Gandalf to end up with Narya, because they don't really do anything else at the Grey Havens. They just show up there. They're like, we're wizards, and then they leave.
Okay, so like all of them show up, and Círdan is like, here's a ring for you, and the rest of you be gone.
Well, so Círdan is known for being extremely wise. It's like his thing. Like, he's one of the elves that's old enough that he might have been one of the original elves that didn't even have parents. Like, he just woke up. He's so old that he's also the only elf that's ever described as having a big beard. Like, he has a big long gray beard as an elf. So he's known for being extremely wise, and when the wizards arrive, Saruman is in charge. Like, he's the leader of their order, but he can see that Gandalf is the one that's actually like the wisest among them, and that he's going to do like important things, and so he gives him the ring in secret.
Was Saruman just like, this is bullshit?
I don't think Saruman knew. I think that he managed to give it to him like secretly.
I'm gonna go be evil.
Yeah.
Do we know how Gandalf gets his staff?
I don't know. I think he just made it. Like, and he's just like, a gnarled old piece of wood. I think he made that staff out of, something. And then Saruman probably made his out of metal.
Which makes sense. That's cool. I like that.
I think it would be cool if we saw the stranger make his staff in the next season. I hope he gets a name, so we don't have to keep calling him stranger.
For now, he's Good the wizard.
Yeah,
I am good.
I am Groot.
I like that.
And he all of a sudden like is really good at talking now. Like, he's finally caught on to the basic language.
Well, I mean, they said that they lifted the veil off of him, like the cultists did that. So I mean, maybe that was what was kind of like holding him back.
Yeah, this whole time I've been like, oh my god, use your words. Like,
yeah. Like, he scares the heck out of Nori when he's trying to heal his arm, and she gets some frostbite or whatever.
Yeah. Which I still think works really well with Gandalf the White returning and not remembering stuff.
Like there clearly is kind of a when they transition from like completely the Undying Realm into Middle Earth. There's some kind of confusion.
Yeah.
At least
I
at
re-
first.
I love this comparison. Thanks, Brian, for the super chat. My only beef with the finale is that they forgot about poor Isildur under the rubble. He's like the Tolkien equivalent of Barb from Stranger Things. Well, we know he's not dead, but it's true. Like, no one but that horse cared to really look into whether or not he was actually dead. The horse is like, I know he's not dead. I'm out.
Yeah.
I did think that was interesting because even in the previously on the Rings of Power, it showed him like falling under the rubble.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, we're going to catch up with Isildur. It was still important to know that because Elendil and his scenes, but I thought for sure we would see Isildur climbing out of the rubble and trying to start escaping Mordor or something. But it's interesting that they're going to hold on to that. I guess they're allowed to because again, we know what happens. But I wanted to bring up this because just because I want to yell at Alden and Rachel were the people that put the Halbrand thing in my mind, and I'm furious that you're correct, you son of a bitch. And I know you broke Kin's heart too. Kin was like, no, that's not real. That Halbrand's just a good guy.
I saw a lot of people online that were mad that like it seemed like there was some like potential romance between the two of them. I didn't really get that feeling. He was just kind of like, yeah, you can rule with me.
I mean, I'm fine with it. Like I thought it was actually cool that Sauron attempted to do that because it would have actually been really good for him if he had Galadriel on his side. And also there's precedent for that. Like the King of Doriath was like Melian was his wife and she was a Maiar. Like there's already a perfectly good example in the Silmarillion of an elf and a Maiar being married and ruling a kingdom together and it being really beneficial for them.
Yeah, well, I agree with this.
Yeah, but I think that there was a connection. I mean, they again in the previously on, they cut back to episode 6 where they talked about fighting side by side, and they were like, "Yeah, I felt a connection with you," and maybe it was just that they have a similar energy, a similar ultimate goal, I guess, if you squint your eyes. But
well, and at the time, I kind of rolled my eyes about the like, are they going for like a weird like love interest thing with Galadriel? But that was when I thought Halbrand was just a dude, and when I was like, what's the deal with Celeborn? And then they sort of answered both of those things. I mean, we still don't know exactly what the deal is with Celeborn, but we know that Galadriel thinks that he's dead. So I don't know. I think it's actually kind of an interesting avenue to explore if Sauron was trying to really like corrupt Galadriel to his side.
Yeah. Again,
this is how Gandalf gets his staff. Thanks, Tom Strand, for another super chat. The Harfoots put a lizard up Gandalf's nose, and he went off and pulled a branch off of an int. That's his staff.
I love that.
Like, that would be painful for an int, I feel like. Where are the ints?
Also, what happens to the lizard?
It eventually comes back out and goes back into its little basket.
That we did see an int in episode 1, I think, briefly. It was when the meteor flew over.
Oh right, yeah, because that was in the trailer, and everybody was like ints, and then they didn't come up at all.
They're around. I bet we'll see him at some point.
I hope so. I think it would be fitting for the stranger and Nori to like run into one, because I feel like that would be a fun little trio.
Yeah.
Well, if they really wanted to make all of the like, Tolkien fans squeal, they could have them actually meet int wives instead of just ints.
On their way to being lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because one of the prevailing theories is that the int wives lived in what eventually becomes the Brown Lands, which didn't become the Brown Lands until Sauron was already in Mordor, and there was like a big battle that sort of devastated that area. So it's possible that at this point in Middle Earth's history, the int wives are still around somewhere.
Cool.
Is that in the east where they're headed?
Sort of, yeah.
I don't like the name the Brown Lands, but
Well, that's because afterwards they were just brown and desolate.
oh man, this just popped into my head. Completely unrelated, but with Mordor. So obviously the Dead Marshes are not a thing yet. But is like the Emyn Muil, is all that stuff just part of the natural geography, topography, or does that come up later?
So the swamps aren't there yet. At this point, they would probably be some kind of like grasslands or something, before they get trampled and turned into a bog. But I mean, I guess that the razor sharp rocks and all that sort of stuff is probably there at this point. So I guess that's just naturally there.
It makes sense, but
what is that?
I was curious about that. That's where Frodo and Sam are kind of lost at the beginning of the Two Towers, and where they meet Gollum.
Yeah, when they like lasso Gollum and pull him off of a small cliff, like that area is Emyn Muil.
And then what did you call it? The Dead Marshes.
The Dead Marshes, yeah.
Yeah. That was like one of my favorite things from those movies because I just thought it was so cool and creepy.
Mm-hmm.
It's super spooky.
It reminded me of Poltergeist, and that's probably why I liked it so much.
But yeah, like to go back to Sauron after I took us off track. I think that the romance side of things, I do think they were trying to build up a connection, but I think it was more just to make that betrayal for Galadriel feel that much worse.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I read into it. I don't think that there's going to be some 5-season long will they won't they between Galadriel and Sauron.
Well, I am curious what they're going to do with Galadriel and Sauron though, because there seems to be an indication that like Galadriel knows that Halbrand is Sauron, but she doesn't necessarily want to tell everyone that because it's kind of her fault that he is alive.
you could
probably
definitely
upset about that, but at the same time doesn't want everyone to know that it's her fault, I guess. So there'll be an interesting like, does she tell everyone or not? Sort of.
And
Elrond seemed to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, like Sauron says as much too. He's like, if you go and tell them, they're probably not going to forgive you. And you can kind of see it on her face when she goes to suggest a third ring. She's like, yeah, trust me on this. And yeah.
Well, I mean, Elrond might just think that like Halbrand's not a good guy or not someone that they should trust. He might not know that it's Sauron.
Yeah. He knows that there's something up, I guess, because he found that scroll and knew that something was wrong. Yeah. So does that all fit with the 3 rings being made kind of outside of Sauron's influence, but still with the skills that he provided?
Sort of. I mean, the biggest question I have is where the other rings are going to come in, because basically in the books, what happens is Anatar, Halbrand in this situation, shows up, kind of teaches the elves of Eregion some of the secrets to ring lore and making rings of power. And then they make a bunch of rings of power. Some of them are minor rings that never even matter. It'll be like a ring of good luck or a ring of tying your shoes or something.
Like toe rings.
Yeah. and then like, but then they make the major rings of power, which are the 7 that end up with the dwarves, the 9 that end up with the Nazgul. And then because Galadriel and Gil-galad both distrusted Anatar, they convinced Celebrimbor to make 3 rings completely without his knowledge, without him even knowing that they made them, and without his influence, that are the 3 elven rings. So in the show, they're doing it a little bit different. We haven't really seen any of the other rings. We just saw these 3, but it seems like they did make them without Halbrand being around. So it's possible that the 9 and the 7 might have already been made, like when they were practicing, or something, like when they were figuring out the process before they made the actual mithril ones. I don't know.
When Galadriel says that line of like, I think it's her that says it, that these can only be for the elves. and the camera goes straight to Elrond, and you can just see it all over his face, like, "Oh, I'm telling my best friend,
Yeah.
the dwarf."
Durin's getting a ring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I sent Ashton a TikTok the other day of like it was everyone's fighting for their lives constantly in the Rings of Power, and then we cut to Elrond and Durin just like sharing wine and partying the whole series. Just love that for them.
Just
Well, it
painting each other's
also-
nails and
I mean, it's also an interesting thing that like that might become a big theme going forward because presumably Durin, Elrond's friend, or his father, one of the two, is going to get one of the 7
Mhm.
dwarvish rings. And if Elrond already distrusts Halbrand, and Halbrand is involved in making those 7 rings, then Elrond's going to have some strong opinions about them actually taking it.
Yeah. So real quick, oh no, go ahead. I have questions about the rings, but we can.
Yeah, since we're talking about Halbrand, Brian Ferreira, thanks for the super chat. I saw a similarity between Halbrand and Pharazôn in separate episodes, how they won over a crowd and bought them drinks. Coincidence or suspicious?
Well, I mean, I think that it's just 2 different characters that are, manipulating people. Because Pharazôn, if you've read the books, you know that Pharazôn isn't. Well, he's not. he has his own best interests in mind. Without spoiling.
Well, I think that's a fun way of foreshadowing, I guess. Like knowing vaguely what happens.
Yeah.
That does seem purposeful in a way.
And then Bakey sent in a super chat. Does the general divergence from the lore impact your enjoyment of the series?
Not for me, really. I mean, I enjoy the story from the books, but I feel like there's enough holes in the story that they're just filling with details. And then where it does diverge, I think it's just them finding ways to tell the story in the TV show medium. And get around like production problems like having to recast human characters constantly, that sort of thing. And then other than that, like I'm kind of glad that Halbrand's character's name wasn't Anatar from the beginning because
Sure.
I would have been like, oh well, we know who that is, And who knows, maybe Halbrand disappears and then some Anatar guy shows up and then I mean we don't know what they're going to do in the next season, but
he could shapeshift into Anatar and just be like, now my name's Anatar.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then they don't recognize him.
But yeah, the things that they're like the actual divergences, I think they've actually kept them pretty like to a minimum. I mean, there's a lot of things that we're getting that are details that we didn't have before. But I like those things. So yeah, I don't think it's really affected my enjoyment of it.
I mean, I know the Second Age just doesn't have much detail to it in the first place. There's also, like you say, there's just things that when you're doing an adaptation, they have to be changed. And even with the Lord of the Rings films, like I think they're widely celebrated now for good reason. They're amazing. But things are going to have to change as long as they keep to the spirit of what Tolkien wanted to say. I think that's the most important part. And I think they've done that so far. I'm not super well versed in all the Tolkien stuff, but like all of the lore divergences, I don't notice them. And it makes me think of people who don't notice that stuff in Star Wars, because like I notice all of the lore divergences, but really like the super die hard, like I know everything about this thing people, they're not the target audience for the show. Like they're trying to ease people into the world. And
yeah,
hopefully they read the books and stuff down the line.
The way this season ended was like perfect for me. I was like, I get all of this. The rings are here now. We have the show name thing now. Like Sauron's here now. Like it all kind of made sense to me in a very comforting way. So as someone who doesn't really know the lore that well, I thought it was great.
Well, and also, I mean, the original trilogy, like the Peter Jackson trilogy, it had divergences from the lore too, you know, and I think that those were for the most part, better for the, it made the movies more enjoyable. Like the elves showing up at Helm's Deep instead of it being Elrond's sons because they weren't cast in the movie. Like there's things like that they did that because they didn't want the cast of characters to. Like, there were production reasons for why they did it that way, and I think that it turned out fine. So I guess a combination of that and also having a frame of reference of it could be much worse as far as their treatment of the source material. Like anybody who's seen the Wheel of Time show knows that like they could have definitely thrown out much more of the original source material than they did, and I think they did a great job with it. So,
where is Tom Bombadil?
Yeah,
that's what I want to
know. I don't know anything about the Wheel of Time. I haven't read those books either. So watching that, I was just like, yeah, this is good. Like I liked Rings of Power more, but Ashton and I have had talks about how those adaptations have not lived up.
Yeah. Yeah, that one. It's yeah. I won't get into it too much, but yeah, I have no idea how they're supposed to do any of the future books with any of the future seasons of that show at all.
Well, just wait until season 2 of Rings of Power when we get Sexy Shelob, and then we'll revisit. I gotta find a way to bring that up every episode. Okay, so something I wanted to ask. I see that Tom Strand sent another super chat, but when we were talking about the Rings of Power, I wanted to ask, what is the purpose of the rings, especially the 3? Is it to kind of sustain the elves at this time?
Well, I mean, we don't really have any like it seems like kind of a show invention, the whole thing about the elves waning and needing to leave Middle Earth if they didn't find some solution. But at the same time, it does actually kind of match up with what's in the books, where we kind of have a situation where in Middle Earth, the time of the elves is over, and like the Age of Men is starting, and they're leaving Middle Earth because they're, for whatever reason, their kingdoms and their works are all kind of like fading. And so we do kind of have that in the original Lord of the Rings. It just wasn't ever really explained specifically why that was a thing. And yeah, in the original books, the rings do exactly that. Like the fact that Galadriel has her ring in Lothlorien is why Lothlorien is like this old age style elven kingdom with these giant trees and like all of this stuff. Like as soon as her ring loses its power, those trees start to kind of like go away. Those Nailorn trees stop growing properly, and eventually they just fade away. So that is a thing in the books too, that the rings being carried by Elrond, Galadriel, and Círdan did kind of keep their elven kingdoms vibrant and alive.
Why no ring for Thranduil?
Well, Thranduil, yeah, he wasn't really in the in crowd with those people. Like he was a wood elf,
He gets a sick crown. It's fine.
Yeah, and he has a cool like elk friend.
Yeah.
You mentioned the 7 and the 9. So what is the purpose of the Rings of Power? Especially like now, I don't understand what the dwarves need them for and what the men need them for. Like, what do they? Did they amplify?
So we don't really know exactly what the purpose of the rings would have been. I mean, it kind of, actually thinking about it right now, it kind of makes sense that if they were like practice versions for the 3 rings that they actually made, but it was while Halbrand was still there, so he was kind of telling them, throw this in there, do that this way, so that it would actually serve the purpose he had in mind, which was that they would be controlled by the One Ring.
Yeah.
Because the idea for Sauron, but the reason it makes sense, before I get to what they actually did, the reason it makes sense is that its effect on men is that it drew them into the unseen world very, very powerfully. So for elves, the idea of it strengthening their sort of spiritual self kind of makes sense. It's just that with men, it's strengthening a spiritual self that they don't have. So it's actually siphoning them into that spirit world.
And they felt left out.
Yeah, also that. But what it ended up actually doing, and what Sauron's corruption and his hand in the process achieved, is that though they did that, they also tied the bearer to the One Ring and made their will subservient to Sauron's. Over time, they like became more and more under his thrall. So
did they also make you live longer?
I don't think so, but it basically just turned them into spirits. So they didn't really have like a, die of old age. By the time they would get that old, they would have gotten completely transformed into like a ghost,
That's
like
eternity of a sense.
Yeah, in a way. But the idea, to answer your question about the 7, though, from what I understand, they were basically the same types of rings. Like the magic that they had on them was the same, and Sauron intended them to work the same. But because dwarves are made by Aule, and they like actually physiologically function differently than elves and humans, it just didn't work on them. And all it did was make it amplified their worst qualities, but it didn't turn them into Nazgul, and it didn't make them actually subservient to Sauron. They were too stubborn for that.
I feel like I like the idea that the 7 and the 9 could just be we tried and we failed, but here, have these rings. But I feel like we would have seen that, or had some allusion to that it's like, well, we have these 16 rings lying around.
Well, what we might end up seeing is that, like, while Halbrand was there, they made some like mock-ups of what the rings were going to be like, and that they had some magical properties. They were just lower power versions of it because they didn't have as much mithril in them. And then maybe we find out, and Halbrand stole them before he left Eregion, before he disappeared. And now people are like, where'd they go?
Yeah.
And how many of them were there? Oh, there were 16 of them. Bum, bum, bum,
Yeah.
I had to bring this up because sexy Shelob. She's got legs for days, literally.
Yeah. Yes. That video game is just it's a fun game, but its story doesn't make any sense.
We haven't answered this one yet, I don't think. Thanks, Tom. Apart from the Lord of the Rings, and I would say the Silmarillion, I guess, what other Tolkien works would you recommend reading?
So if you want to know more about how the world functions, don't play Shadows of Mordor.
It's a fun game. Oh, wait, I haven't played that one. Wait. No, I did play Shadow of Mordor, not Shadow of War.
It's a fun video game, but it doesn't make any sense with the lore. But to answer your actual question, though, the main thing is the Silmarillion. That's a great a good read for someone that just wants to understand the setting more. It is kind of like reading a textbook, like a history book, so it can be kind of dry at times, and sometimes it can be extremely sort of like abstract with the creation myth and stuff. It can be hard to get through that for the first time.
Oh, sorry. They clarified big 3 meaning Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, and Silmarillion.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, other than that, I mean, there's like Children of Hurin is great. Like the things that Christopher Tolkien edited to get it to publication are pretty much all great. And there's collections of Tolkien's notes if you want to see like other things that he that he wrote but didn't necessarily publish or didn't decide to go that way. Like all the different ideas that he had for where orcs come from, for example, are found in his notes. And so you can get like Unfinished Tales and Lays of Beleriand and things like that. But I mean, really the Silmarillion, Lord of the Rings, and the Hobbit are the main like canon things. So yeah.
Cool.
Children of Hurin is great though. I definitely would recommend that.
I haven't read that, and like that's an actual story, right? Like it was told in the Silmarillion, but then they expanded it out. And
yeah, basically Christopher Tolkien took his father's notes and fleshed out what was already in the Silmarillion of that section of the history and made it into its own novel. So
nice. Simon Rodriguez, thanks for the super chat. I think the purpose of the rings is to corrupt the elves. Without spoiling too much, I think all the rings were initially meant for the elves.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that the idea that Sauron originally had was that if they hadn't figured out who he was, then he would have left the rings with the elves. Important elves would have worn them and then slowly become under his sway. And they wouldn't have turned into ghosts, probably, because that's a thing that was unique to humans wearing them. So he would have just had a bunch of powerful, influential elves that he could control.
Cool.
But then when they found out who Anatar was, then they all got rid of their rings and wouldn't put them on, except for the 3 secret ones. And so his plan to corrupt the elves would have been completely foiled at that point. So instead, he steals the rings and then gives them out to human and dwarves.
Huh. Okay. Okay. Now I'm really interested to see how they do the other rings for everyone else. That's interesting.
I'm really curious to see if Elrond already knows that the rings are bad news, how it's going to happen when his friend or his friend's father is wearing this magical ring in Khazad Dûm,
Huh. So that's cool. I like that. I didn't know that about the...
Who's writing this?
Oh yeah, I remember. I heard about that. I'm not sure. I mean, it's going to be Tolkien notes thrown together into a story, I'm assuming. But yeah, that'll be interesting. I don't know who the author is though.
Because Christopher Tolkien did Children of Húrin and the Fall of Gondolin. I think they also published that. And so it's Tolkien, but is Christopher Tolkien still around?
No, he died a few years ago.
So now Simon Tolkien is kind of the main person. He's the one in the credits.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, he's probably the person that controls the Tolkien estate, I guess. But Christopher Tolkien didn't finish the writing because he had a very high respect for his father's work, and he didn't want to treat it the same way that Dune was treated. But he was willing to take the notes, edit them into a publishable form, and then release that. But he wasn't really. I don't think he was really interested in adding to the story himself.
That's way too much pressure for someone's children to I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, because if you pissed off the fan base, they would never let you live that down.
Well, he was super purist about it too. Reportedly, he really didn't like the Peter Jackson movies either because they changed too many things. So.
I don't know much about Dune, but I think if you look at Brian Herbert, I don't think the fans like his works as much.
By and large, yeah, that would be true.
But that's outside of my knowledge completely. I think, I guess just to wrap up, how did you feel about the season as a whole? Now that it's over and done with, a fifth of the story, I guess, has been told. How would you rank it among your other Tolkien experiences?
I thought it was great. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I mean, there were a lot of points in the show where the only things that bummed me out as far as changes that they made was when I felt like they were making a big shortcut that was going to cut out a bunch of the story, because there were things that I wanted to see on screen. But whenever that happened,
is there an example of that?
I can't think of one off the top of my head, but there were some moments watching the show where that happened, I remember. And every time that happened, though, the next episode or the episode after that would happen, and I would realize, oh, they're not doing the shortcut I thought they were doing.
Okay.
So I'm not really worried about that sort of thing, and I'm very excited about seeing the rest of the show and see what they do with it.
Molly, how did you feel?
I loved it. No complaints, except I wanted more ints.
Well, hopefully we'll get more.
I want int wives. I think that would be cool.
I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah, and
something we've never seen before.
Someone earlier mentioned the fact that Sauron can shapeshift. With all the money that they're funneling into this show, I want to see some more cool magic-y stuff. When the stranger turned those cultists into moths, that was so cool. So I just want to see more magic stuff too.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the way that they've done all of the effects, the CGI versus the practical effects, it's been so much better than the Hobbit movies were, and so much more the quality, the level of quality and polish that we saw in the Peter Jackson movies, that it's been really, really nice to see that. All the orcs and everything Like all those
orcs
practical
are
costumes
so
have been
good.
so great.
The orcs were actually scary and not kind of like bumbling idiots.
Hmm.
I've really enjoyed it too. I think it took me a little while. I feel like I was just skeptical of like, I don't know if this is going to be as good as the Jackson movies, and I still prefer them. But after episode 6, especially, I was like, I really, really like it. Look forward to
Well,
more.
and I don't really want to like compare them to the Peter
Yeah.
Jackson movies either, because like the Peter Jackson, for one thing, it was an adaptation of a very specific story that already existed. So it's
Yeah.
hard to really hold them to the same standards. But also, watching this is making me appreciate some of the things in the Peter Jackson movies even more.
Mhm.
You know, like some of the details that they're adding to the story make the things that happen later that it frames them in a different light, which is really cool. You know, it's
Yeah.
actually making the other one better in a way.
I think that's a great point, that it's not like not to compare the live action adaptations, but that they're, I think, just Tolkien in general. Like if I go back and I read the Mirror of Galadriel chapter, that alone, I'm going to have more understanding of it. It's going to hit different. And I like that a lot.
And in so many different avenues, also seeing like Khazad Dûm before it became a ruin, and like seeing the Balrog, and like you know, like things that end up popping up later in the story. It's really just, it's fun.
Something that we didn't really touch on. What do you think is going to end up from the storyline about the Palantir? Because like the king's dead, right? They go back to Numenor and they're flying the like black flags or whatever. So the king is dead, and then I forget her name, but like she goes. Do you think she like looks into the Palantir and sees something crazy?
I don't know. So that's Isildur's sister. That character is an invention for the show. She wasn't in the books. In the books, he has a brother named Anarion, which they mentioned him earlier in the show. I'm really curious what his the status of that character is. Like, they didn't say that he's dead. They just said that he went west. And so I'm curious if there's like a whole nother section of Numenor that's kind of does things differently and like keeps to the old ways or something like that, and they're going to show up later in the story. Like maybe they're going to come in season 2 or something. And maybe that's like where the rest of the Palantir are, because they're supposed to have all of them.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really interesting that one is like showing people visions of the fall of Numenor, and I'm curious how that plays out.
I liked that we had that final scene with Tar Palantir, and it was just like House of the Dragon. It's like, with these old dying kings, just pay attention to who they're talking to, please.
They're like, nope,
and I didn't answer your question. I don't know if she actually ended up looking at the Palantir or not. That's actually intriguing to think about. But she knows about this, like, I guess, secret passage to that room that has Narsil and the Palantir and other relics up there. So somehow Elendil is going to end up with Narsil.
Yeah.
And we now know that his daughter knows where it is. So,
hey, Dad, I stole this sword.
Yeah.
Well, I guess for one more little wrap up question, we can talk about predictions for season 2 real quick. But I also wanted to say thanks, Tom, for 2 more super chats. And yeah, what do you think the arc of season 2 might look like?
I think season 2 we might find out what the deal is with the other rings, like where the 9 and the 7 are.
Right.
And then maybe have Sauron establishing himself in Mordor, and probably fighting with Adar.
Yeah, that seems like an interesting conflict they've set up.
And then I think that we'll also have some storyline with Isildur, and wherever he's going to go. I think later in the show, maybe not season 2, we'll end up seeing, but maybe it is season 2, we'll see Numenor return and fight with Sauron and take him prisoner back to Numenor before it actually collapses.
Cool. You think he'll be captured by the end of season 2?
Maybe. I don't know. I think it would make sense for him to be captured in season 2. Numenor's fall happens in season 3. Season 4, he shows back up in Mordor, establishing his dominance there, and then season 5 we get the last alliance.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Because we have to have a reason for Sauron to be stuck in his like Dark Lord form. So
Yeah.
I think that he still does need to get captured by Numenor. I don't think that, well, he was in Numenor making swords for a minute counts. So hopefully they still do the him getting captured thing.
Yeah, I think
I
they
like
should.
I like this idea. Since we were talking about sexy Shelob, Subro sent in a super chat. I hope that since we have fair form Sauron, we get sexy Sauron. I mean, Halibran was sexy.
Yeah, what are
but,
you saying? Like, I thought we already got sexy Sauron.
Yeah. Also, unlike a certain spider character, he is a shapeshifter, so it would make sense. He can be whatever he wants to be.
Well, cool.
Right now,
and then
until he gets crushed by the ocean.
Jon Snow rules. Thanks for the super chat. Season 2 will release April 24, I hope. Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that would probably make sense. Like a year and a half between seasons.
It's
seems
weird,
like a lot for them to get done in a year. I mean, those episodes were all very long.
It's interesting, the streaming kind of side of the industry now. Things don't come out exactly a year later the way that they used to on network television. Now it's just kind of like, it'll come out when it comes out.
Well, they don't have to, because they're not
yeah.
part of a like syndicated, like the schedule is not really that important anymore.
Yeah, it's fine. I just kind of like miss the being able to rely on that yearly kind of thing. But
yeah.
Oh well. But that's going to wrap it up for us today and for the Rings of Power until season 2, hopefully before 2024, but who knows? So thanks, Ashton, for explaining Lord of the Rings to us. Where can people follow you and watch your stuff online?
So lately I've been working with some of our other friends on Slam Sector, where we're doing some Warhammer content, a lot of battle reports, and other content related to Warhammer 40K mostly, but maybe we'll do some Warhammer Fantasy stuff at some point also. But yeah, you can check all of that out at Slam Sector.
Awesome. We will be back on Wednesday to talk about Andor episode 7. And we'll do a Lego stream, I'm sure, later this week. But that's what our streaming schedule looks like. So thank you all again for tuning in and watching and talking about Rings of Power with us. And I forget every week to think up something different to say that's not May the Force be
I'm
with
not
you.
doing it this time.
Fine.
We can just do Namarie.
I am
Namarie,
good.
yeah, that's good. Namarie, I am good. Lots of stuff.
No, go towards goodness. It's not. Oh wait, I am good. That's a different thing, right?
Namarie means I am good.
I am good.
All right, see you, everybody.